She said, "Cowboy, I came to marry you." Then he realized she was the girl he saved 20 years. Luke Henderson had always been a man of quiet routines. Every morning before the sun touched the horizon, he would saddle his horse, Dusty, and ride out across the vast golden fields of his ranch. The Texas sky stretched endlessly above him, a canvas of soft pinks and oranges in the early light, and Luke often felt a deep peace in those quiet moments when the only sounds were the low mooing of cattle and the distant call of a hawk. Life on the ranch was simple, steady, and familiar, a rhythm he had grown up with and found comfort in. He liked it that way. Luke's days were long, but they were honest. He repaired fences, tended to sick animals, helped his neighbors with heavy work, and made sure his ranch ran smoothly. He wasn't rich, but he didn't need to be. What he valued most was the sense of freedom that came with wide-open land, the satisfaction of a job done well, and the quiet, self-reliant life he led. People in town respected him. He was known as a trustworthy man who never hesitated to lend a hand when someone needed help. But for all his respect and kindness, Luke had always preferred the company of animals to that of most people. Humans, he thought, were complicated. Horses and cows, by contrast, were simple, predictable, and honest. On one bright spring morning, Luke followed his usual routine. He fed the cattle, repaired a broken gate, and rode along the creek to check the fencing near the riverbank. The water ran clear and fast, sparkling in the sunlight, and for a moment he paused to admire it. There was something calming about the river, the way it flowed steadily, never stopping, always moving forward. Luke often thought life should be more like a river, steady, clear, and simple. After finishing his morning chores, he decided to head into town. The local rodeo was happening that weekend, and he wanted to check the preparations. The town of Cedar Creek wasn't big, just a few streets lined with shops, a diner, and the old town hall. People knew each other here. News traveled fast, and strangers were easy to spot. Luke usually enjoyed the occasional trip into town. It gave him a break from the isolation of the ranch, but he never expected that day to be different. He tied Dusty to the post outside the general store and walked in, nodding to familiar faces. He greeted old Mr. Thompson, who ran the hardware section, and waved at Carla, the waitress from the diner. Life was simple, predictable, and safe here. But then, as he stepped out of the store, he saw her. She was standing near the center of the town square, a young woman with a confident stance and a bright, determined look in her eyes. Her long hair shone in the sunlight, and she wore a simple dress, but the way she held herself made her seem like she belonged to a different world, someone from a storybook, not from the quiet town of Cedar Creek. What caught Luke off guard, however, was the directness in her voice when she spoke. "I've come to marry you," she said, loud enough for a few curious onlookers to hear. Luke froze. For a moment he thought he must have misheard. Perhaps she was joking. Perhaps she meant someone else. But when he looked at her, he realized she was completely serious. He blinked, unsure how to respond. "I beg your pardon?" he finally managed to say, his voice low and careful. The woman smiled. "I'm Emily. I came to marry you." Her tone was calm but firm, as though she had traveled a long road just to say those words. Luke felt a mix of confusion and disbelief swirl inside him. He had never seen this woman before, at least not that he remembered. And yet there was something in her eyes, a spark of recognition perhaps, that made him pause. The townspeople had begun to gather, whispering among themselves. Cedar Creek was small, and any unusual event quickly became the center of attention. Luke could feel the curious eyes on him, and he hated being the focus. He was not a man used to drama or surprises, and this certainly qualified as both. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Emily continued. "I know this must sound strange," she said, her voice gentle now, as if trying to calm his alarm. "It is, I admit, but I need you to believe me. Do you watch all? I know you don't remember me, but I know you saved my life." Luke's brow furrowed. "Saved your life," he repeated, trying to make sense of her words. "I think you must be mistaken. I don't." "I'm not," she interrupted, her gaze unwavering. 20 years ago, when I was just a little girl, I was caught in the flood near my family's farm. You—" She hesitated, taking a deep breath. "You saved me that day."
I never forgot you, and I've come back because I think we're meant to be.
Luke felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. A flood? A child? Him? It all sounded like a story from another life, one he had buried deep in the past, or perhaps had never really thought about at all. His mind raced, trying to recall any memory that might match what she was saying. He was fairly certain he hadn't forgotten such an event. If it had happened, he would have remembered it. And yet, there was something about the certainty in her eyes that made it hard to dismiss her words entirely. He looked around. A few neighbors were still watching, curiosity written plainly on their faces. Some were whispering, others were staring in disbelief, but all seemed to sense that this was more than a casual encounter. Luke took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He had always been careful with his emotions, preferring logic and reason over assumption and instinct. But this was neither logical nor simple. Emily stepped closer, and the faint scent of wildflowers and fresh spring air seemed to follow her. "I know it's sudden," she said softly, "but I've thought about this for a long time. I've carried it with me every day since that flood. You were my hero, and now I want to be with you." Luke studied her, searching for any sign of deception. There was none. Only honesty. Only the quiet intensity of someone who had come a very long way to find him. Part of him wanted to dismiss it, to turn and walk back to the safety of his routines. But another part, a small, stubborn part he barely recognized, wanted to listen, wanted to understand, wanted to believe. For a moment they stood there in silence, the sounds of the town fading into the background. The breeze carried the scent of hay and earth, the distant bark of a dog, and the murmur of a nearby stream. Luke felt the weight of the years pressing on him, the memory of a life lived in predictable patterns, suddenly colliding with the unexpected. And in that collision, a spark of curiosity, and perhaps something more, began to grow. He finally spoke, his voice steady, though his heart raced. "Emily, if what you say is true, then I need to know everything. I need to hear your story, because right now, I don't remember." Her smile didn't falter. "I'll tell you everything," she said. "But you need to trust me." Luke nodded slowly. Trust had always been a careful choice for him, not something given freely. But there was something in her eyes, something familiar yet unplaceable, that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, this was a moment he couldn't ignore. He gestured toward the edge of town, where the old wooden bench by the creek provided some privacy. "Let's sit," he said. "Start from the beginning." And so, with cautious curiosity, Luke Henderson and Emily began a conversation that would unravel decades of memory, heroism, and destiny. That morning, the quiet routines of the rancher's life were interrupted in the most extraordinary way. Little did he know that the story she was about to tell him would not only reveal a long-forgotten moment from his past, but also change the course of his life. Forever. Luke listened carefully as Emily began to speak, her voice steady but carrying a quiet urgency that made him lean in closer. She started with the beginning, the part he barely remembered, or perhaps had forgotten entirely. "It was a spring afternoon, just like today," Emily said softly. "The river had been rising for days because of heavy rain upstream. My family's farm was near the banks, and by the time the flood reached us, the water was already moving fast. I was just 8 years old, scared and alone for a moment while my parents were trying to save the animals. I remember slipping, the water pulling me toward the current, and then—" Luke's chest tightened. He could almost feel the panic she must have felt, the helplessness of a child caught in something far too powerful to control. He had always known life on the ranch came with dangers, but he had never imagined a child in such peril, not so close to him, and not a memory he could recall. "I thought I was going to drown," Emily continued, her eyes glistening with the memory. "And then someone grabbed me. Someone strong, steady, and suddenly I was safe. You were there. You pulled me from the river, wrapped me in your coat, and carried me back to the farm. I remember your voice, calm, commanding, but kind, telling me it would be okay. That you had me." Luke shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his mind straining to recall anything. He had saved lives before, animals, neighbors, even friends in tricky situations. But a child, 20 years ago? Nothing came to the surface. And yet there was something in her voice, something pure and unwavering, that made him want to believe every word. "After that day," Emily said, "I never forgot you. I knew I owed my life to you, and I carried that memory with me through everything. I thought about it often, about the man who saved me, and I wondered if I'd ever see him again. Now I have." Luke remained silent for a moment, processing her words. He wanted to believe her, but his practical mind struggled with the details. The flood, the river, the child. He had grown up and lived through many years without this memory surfacing. Could it have been buried so deeply that he had completely forgotten? Or was it someone else entirely? Emily noticed his hesitation but did not waver. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said, "and I don't expect you to trust me immediately. But I came here because I had to. I couldn't let life go by without finding you and telling you the truth." The sincerity in her words, the quiet intensity, struck something in Luke he hadn't felt in years. He had always been cautious with people, slow to trust and even slower to open his heart. But there was something different about Emily, a kind of bravery and honesty that demanded attention. "Do you remember anything like that?" she asked gently. Luke shook his head slowly. "No, I don't. I wish I did. I really do."
Emily nodded, understanding. "It's okay."
Most people wouldn't. I only knew because I kept thinking about it, writing it down in my mind, remembering every detail. I never told anyone else, because no one would believe me. But I remember you, and I knew one day, somehow I would find you. They sat in silence for a moment, the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant sound of the creek filling the air between them. Luke could feel his mind racing, trying to piece together a memory he couldn't quite reach. He thought of the river, the ranch, and his years spent riding and working the land. He had seen floods before, and he had helped people in trouble, but he had no clear memory of saving a little girl. Yet as he watched Emily, he noticed small details that felt familiar, though he couldn't explain why. The way she carried herself, the certainty in her voice, and the quiet courage she radiated, all of it reminded him of something deep in his past, something he had long forgotten but was now awakening. "I need to see the place," Luke said finally, his voice low but firm. I need to go back to the river, to the farm, and see if maybe it will jog my memory. Emily's face lit up with relief. I was hoping you would say that, she said. I can take you there. It's not far. You'll remember, I'm sure of it. They rode together on Dusty, the horse Luke had trusted for years. The journey to the old farm and the river was quiet, filled with the soft rhythm of hooves on dirt paths and the gentle wind brushing against their faces. Luke felt a strange mixture of anticipation and unease. He was about to confront a part of his past that had been hidden for decades. What if he didn't remember? What if she was mistaken? But even in doubt, there was a sense of inevitability, as though the river itself had carried her to him, guiding them both back to that day. When they arrived, Luke saw the river as Emily had described it, wide, powerful, and shimmering in the sunlight. The banks were lined with tall grass, and he could imagine how fast and dangerous the water must have been during the flood. Emily led him to a spot near a large oak tree, pointing out small details that matched her story. A bent fence post, a muddy path, and a faint indentation near the water's edge where she had slipped. Luke knelt down, brushing his hand over the ground, and suddenly a memory flickered. Just a glimpse, a small hand reaching for his, water rushing around them, the weight of responsibility pressing on him as he pulled her to safety. The image was brief, fragmented, but it hit him like a lightning strike. Emily watched him closely. "Do you remember?" she asked softly. Luke exhaled slowly, his eyes wide. "Yes, I think I do. I remember the hand, the water, the fear. And I remember carrying you back. God, I remember now." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "I knew you would," she whispered. "I knew you wouldn't forget." Once you saw it again? Luke stood up, still processing the emotions flooding through him. He had saved a life that day, a life that had grown into this remarkable woman standing before him. The weight of what he had done, combined with the reality of Emily's presence now, filled him with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and an unexpected tenderness. They spent the afternoon retracing the events of that day, walking along the riverbank and pointing out the spots where the flood had been strongest. Emily shared every detail she could remember. The panic of being caught in the current, the way her little boots had slipped, the fear of losing everything. Luke listened intently, piecing together the story as it unfolded, and each revelation deepened the bond forming between them. By the time the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the water, Luke realized that something extraordinary had happened. Not only had he found a memory he thought was lost forever, but he had also reconnected with a part of his life he had never known would matter so deeply. Emily had brought him face to face with courage, gratitude, and a sense of destiny that was impossible to ignore. "Thank you," Luke said finally, his voice filled with emotion. "Not just for reminding me, but for coming back. I don't know what this means yet, but I'm glad you did." Emily smiled, a mixture of relief and happiness in her eyes. "I didn't know how you'd react," she said, "but I knew I had to try. And I think maybe we're meant to figure it out together." As they rode back toward town, the sky painted in deep oranges and purples, Luke felt a quiet shift inside him. His life had always been simple, predictable, and safe. But Emily's return, her courage, and the memory of that day had awakened something new, something that hinted at the possibility of connection, trust, and maybe even love. For Luke Henderson, the quiet routines of his life would never be the same again. And for Emily, the girl who had never forgotten, the journey to find the man who saved her had just begun. The next morning, Luke woke before the sun, as he always did. But something had changed. Normally, he would rise, check the cattle, and ride out without a second thought. Today, however, his mind was filled with images from yesterday. The rushing water, the small hand in his own, and Emily's steady eyes. He could not shake the memory that had returned, nor the strange feeling of anticipation that came with it. Something deep inside him told him that the story was far from over, and that Emily's presence in his life was no accident. He saddled Dusty and rode toward the town, planning to meet Emily. She had promised to take him further into the area around the farm where the flood had been strongest. Luke needed to see it for himself, to walk through the memory, to connect the fragmented images that kept replaying in his mind. He knew that only by confronting the past completely could he truly understand what had happened, and perhaps understand why Emily had come back now, after 20 years. When he reached the town square, Emily was already waiting, her posture relaxed but alert, a small notebook tucked under her arm. She smiled when she saw him. "Good morning, Luke," she said. "Ready to go?" He nodded. "I need to see everything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though he felt the familiar tightness of nerves in his chest. "I need to remember fully." Emily gestured toward the old dirt road that led toward the river's bend. "I'll take you there. You'll see exactly where it happened. Every detail matters." As they rode side by side, the morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming wildflowers. Luke noticed how calm Emily seemed, how certain she was about everything. It was not just confidence. There was a quiet strength in her presence, a certainty that came from years of remembering and holding on to the truth. He admired it even as he questioned it, still unsure how he could have forgotten something so important. They reached a small clearing near the riverbank, where the water had carved a winding path through the grass. Emily dismounted and led Luke along a narrow trail, pointing out the remnants of old fence posts and flattened grass. "This is where I slipped," she said. "I remember feeling the water pull me down. I was terrified. And then you appeared. You grabbed my hand and lifted me out." Luke knelt, touching the earth, trying to reconstruct the scene in his mind. His memory was fragmented, flashes of rushing water, a little girl's scream, the weight of someone in his arms, but he struggled to put it together. He looked at Emily, studying her face for any sign of doubt. There was none. She was unwavering, calm and sincere. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Why would I forget something like this? Saving a life, it's not something you forget." Emily shook her head gently. "Sometimes the mind protects us," she said. "You were young. You had many responsibilities on the ranch. That day was terrifying for both of us, but perhaps your mind buried it until the right moment. That's why I had to come to you. I had to remind you." Her words made sense in a strange way, though Luke had never heard anything like it. The mind burying memories, only to surface them later. It sounded almost magical. And yet, he could not deny the truth in her eyes. She was speaking from a place of authenticity, not fantasy. They spent hours walking along the riverbank. Emily described the flood in vivid detail, from the way the water had twisted around the old oak tree, to the panic she felt when the currents swept her toward deeper water. She spoke of her parents struggling to keep the animals safe, of the fear that had lodged itself in her chest, and of the moment she saw Luke's face above the water, calm and focused, lifting her to safety. As they walked, Luke began to feel the memories returning in pieces. He remembered the force of the water, the weight of her small body in his arms, and the absolute determination to save her at all costs. He remembered the adrenaline, the fear, and the sense of responsibility that had pressed on him like a heavy weight. Slowly, the fragments started to form a clearer picture in his mind. I remember this pot," he said finally, pointing to the flattened grass where Emily had slipped. "I see it now. I see the way the water moved and how I pulled you out. I can feel it."
Emily's eyes softened.
"I knew you would. I've carried that day with me for 20 years, imagining it over and over, hoping that someday you would remember. And now you do." They paused near the river, the sunlight reflecting off the water in sparkling waves. Luke felt a strange mixture of awe and emotion. He had saved a life that day, a life that had grown into this remarkable woman standing beside him. The weight of that realization pressed on him. He had never thought much about destiny or fate, but in that moment, he felt a quiet understanding that some events were meant to shape lives in ways we could never imagine. Emily looked at him, her gaze steady. "I came back not just to remind you, but because I believe there's more for us. You saved my life once, and I think we were meant to meet again, not by chance, but for a reason." Luke exhaled, feeling the emotions swell inside him. He had always been cautious, slow to trust, and even slower to open his heart. But Emily's presence, her sincerity, and the way she had carried the memory of that day made it impossible to ignore her. He felt something new stirring within him, a combination of gratitude, curiosity, and a growing respect for the courage she had shown by returning after all these years. "I don't know what this means yet," he said slowly, "but I know that meeting you again, it feels important. I need time to understand it, to let it sink in." Emily smiled.
"I'll wait," she said simply. "I knew you would need time."
But I also know that we can't ignore this connection. It's too strong, too real.
They continued along the river, talking less and observing more, letting the quiet of the natural world fill the space between them. Luke felt a strange sense of peace, despite the emotional weight of the day. The river flowed steadily, just as it had 20 years ago, and for the first time, he began to see how the memory he had buried could connect to the present in a way that mattered deeply. As afternoon turned to evening, they returned to the town, where a few neighbors had gathered to watch them come back. Whispers of curiosity followed their path, but Luke found he no longer cared. The world outside their shared moment seemed distant, unimportant compared to the truth they were uncovering together. That night, Luke sat on his porch, thinking about the events of the day. The memory was clearer now, the fragments fitting together like pieces of a puzzle. He remembered the terror in Emily's eyes, the strength he had needed to save her, and the overwhelming relief when she was finally safe. But he also realized that this was more than just a memory. This was a connection, a bond that had started decades ago and had now returned to guide them forward. He looked up at the stars, feeling the quiet night air on his face. Life had been simple, predictable, and steady until Emily appeared. Now it was something more complex, something richer, filled with possibilities he had never imagined. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of anticipation for the future, not just for himself, but for the woman who had come back to remind him of a life-saving moment that had never truly ended. Luke understood something important that night. The past had a way of shaping the present in ways we cannot predict. And sometimes, the people we meet are not just strangers. They are part of a story that has been waiting to unfold, a story that carries lessons, emotions, and connections that last a lifetime. He knew one thing for certain. Emily had returned for a reason, and he could no longer ignore the pull of that reason. 20 years had passed, but the bond formed in that one extraordinary day of courage, fear, and survival had never truly faded. And now, standing at the turning point of memory and destiny, Luke felt the quiet stirrings of something he had long forgotten. Hope, trust, and perhaps even the beginnings of love. The next few days passed slowly, almost as if the world itself had slowed to match Luke's thoughts. He could not stop thinking about Emily, the flood, and the memory that had returned with such intensity. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see her small hand in his, feel the weight of her tiny body, and hear the sound of rushing water. It was as though the past and present were merging, and he was standing in the middle, unsure of what step to take next. Luke decided that he could not simply let this connection remain a memory. He needed to confront it fully, not just the event of the flood, but what it had meant for both of them, and what it could mean now. He called Emily and asked her to meet him by the river at sunrise. She arrived promptly, Dusty trotting beside her, and Luke felt a nervous excitement he had not experienced in years. The river was calm in the early light, but Luke could imagine how violent it had been that day 20 years ago. He remembered the panic, the force of the water, and the fear that had gripped him when he realized a little girl's life was in his hands. He also remembered the sense of responsibility, the knowledge that he had no choice but to save her. That day had defined him in ways he had never realized until now. Emily walked to him, her eyes bright with determination and emotion. "Luke," she said softly, "I think it's time we face everything. Not just the memory, but what it means for us now." Luke nodded, taking a deep breath. "I think you're right," he said. "I've remembered more of that day, more than I thought possible, and I realize now that moment shaped both of our lives in ways I never understood until now." They began walking along the riverbank, the tall grass brushing against their legs, the early morning sun casting long shadows over the water. Emily described the flood again, this time with a clarity and detail that made Luke's heart ache. He could picture the current sweeping her away, the mud beneath his boots, the panic in the air, and the determination that had driven him to reach her.
I was so scared.
Emily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought I would never see anyone again. And then you appeared. You were my hero, Luke. That day saved me in more ways than one, and I've carried it with me all this time." Luke felt a lump in his throat. He had always been a man of action, not words, but now he found himself struggling to speak. The memory of holding a terrified child in his arms, the relief when she was safe, and the knowledge that she had remembered him for 20 years. These feelings were almost too much to contain. "I didn't know you remembered me," Emily continued, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I was the only one who had carried that day in my heart. I've always wondered if I would see you again. And now, here you are." Luke stopped walking and looked at her. The sun highlighted the softness of her face, the strength in her eyes, and the courage that had brought her back to him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with emotion, the river flowing quietly beside them, carrying the weight of the past into the present. "I remember it now," Luke said finally, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I remember the fear, the water, the weight of you in my arms, and I remember the relief when I knew you were safe. I didn't realize how much that day mattered until I saw you again." Emily smiled through her tears. "It mattered to me every single day," she said. "And I think it matters to both of us now." They walked to the very spot where the flood had been at its strongest. Luke knelt and touched the earth, feeling the faint impressions of mud and grass. The memory came rushing back in vivid detail, the sound of rushing water, the fear in her eyes, the sheer effort it took to lift her out. He realized in that moment that saving her had not just been an act of bravery, it had been an act of connection. Their lives had been intertwined from that day forward, in ways neither of them had fully understood until now. Emily watched him closely, her heart beating fast. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly. "The connection between us?" Luke looked at her, seeing the truth in her eyes. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "I feel it. I've never felt anything like it before, and I don't want to ignore it." For the first time in years, Luke felt a vulnerability he had not known. He had always been careful, slow to trust, and even slower to open his heart. But with Emily, the walls he had built around himself seemed to crumble. The memory of that day, the courage she had shown, and the truth of her words had created a bridge between them. A bridge that could not be ignored. Emily took a step closer, her hand brushing against his.
I came back for a reason, Luke. Not just to remind you of the past, but to be part of the future.
"I don't want to rush anything, but I can't pretend that this connection doesn't exist." Luke took her hand gently in his own, feeling the warmth and strength that had drawn him to her from the very first moment he saw her. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, "but I know I want to explore it with you." The sun was higher now, casting golden light across the river. The scene was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos of that day 20 years ago. And yet, in that calm, Luke and Emily found the truth of their bond, a bond formed in fear, strengthened by courage, and now ready to be acknowledged fully. They spent the morning sharing stories, memories, and quiet moments of reflection. Luke spoke of his life on the ranch, of his routines, and of the simplicity he had always valued. Emily listened, sharing her own journey, the years she had spent carrying the memory of that day, and the determination that had brought her back to him. By midday, Luke realized that something profound had shifted. He no longer saw Emily as a stranger or a figure from a long-ago memory. She was real, present, and deeply connected to him in a way that transcended time. The little girl he had saved had grown into a woman of courage, strength, and determination, and she had returned to remind him of the power of that connection. "Emily," Luke said finally, his voice steady and filled with quiet emotion, "I can't change the past, but I can honor it. I can honor it by being here now, with you. By acknowledging what happened, what we feel, and what this connection means." Emily smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "That's all I've ever wanted, Luke. For you to see the truth, and to feel it too." They stood by the river, hand in hand, the water flowing beside them like a symbol of time itself, steady, unstoppable, and carrying the lessons of the past into the promise of the future. In that moment, Luke realized that the flood, the fear, and the rescue had not been just a single event in his life. It had been the beginning of a story that had taken 20 years to unfold fully. And now, at last, he was ready to embrace it. As the day turned to evening, they walked back toward town, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. Luke felt a sense of peace and anticipation he had never known. He had faced the memory, confronted the emotions it carried, and discovered a bond that had endured the test of time. Emily had returned to him not just as a reminder of the past, but as a companion for the future. Sitting together on the porch of Luke's ranch that evening, they watched the stars appear one by one. The quiet of the night was comforting, a reminder that life continued, carrying with it both challenges and blessings. Luke felt gratitude for the past, for Emily's courage, and for the chance to explore what lay ahead. He realized that the day he had saved Emily had shaped both of their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. And now, with her by his side, he felt the possibility of a new chapter, one built on trust, respect, and a connection forged in the most extraordinary of circumstances. For Luke Henderson, the quiet life of the ranch would never be the same. But for the first time in years, he welcomed the change, ready to face it with the woman who had returned, to remind him that sometimes the most important moments in life take years to fully reveal themselves, and that love, courage, and destiny often arrive in ways we could never predict. In the days following the river visit, Luke and Emily began to spend more time together. Life on the ranch, once so predictable, now seemed full of possibilities. Every morning, Luke would wake to the familiar sound of birds singing and the soft lowing of the cattle, but there was a new sense of anticipation in the air. Emily had started helping him with chores, riding alongside him on Dusty, learning the rhythms of ranch life, and sharing in the small, quiet moments that had always brought Luke peace. At first, their routines were simple: feeding the animals, checking fences, and walking along the riverbanks. But with each passing day, their connection deepened. Luke began to notice little things about Emily, the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something new on the ranch, the laughter that escaped her when Dusty spooked at a sudden noise, and the quiet strength she carried, even when she struggled with tasks that were unfamiliar to her. He admired her determination, her courage, and the gentle way she approached both the work and the people around her. Emily, in turn, noticed things about Luke that made her heart swell with admiration. She saw the care he put into every action, the kindness he showed to animals and neighbors, and the patience he had for things that often frustrated others. She loved the way he spoke softly to Dusty, how he noticed the smallest details, and the way he treated everyone with quiet respect. To her, Luke was the same man who had saved her 20 years ago, a hero in every sense of the word. But now she saw more, a man capable of love, understanding, and deep compassion. One afternoon, Luke invited Emily to ride with him to the far edge of the ranch, near a grove of oak trees where the view stretched for miles. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the golden fields. The sky glowed in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the air smelled faintly of fresh grass and wild flowers. Luke felt a quiet excitement as he led Dusty along the trail, but he also felt a nervous tension he had not expected. Emily noticed his unease. "What's on your mind, Luke?" she asked gently. Luke took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about everything," he said slowly. "The flood, that day, and now, us. I know I can't change the past, and I don't want to. But I want to make sure I do right by the future, by you, by us." Emily reached out and took his hand. "You've already done more than I could have asked for," she said softly. "You saved my life once, and now you're here, willing to face everything with me? That's more than enough." Luke looked out at the horizon, the vast field stretching endlessly before him. He felt a deep sense of clarity, as though the memories of the past had finally aligned with the possibilities of the present. "Emily," he said, turning to her, "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know this. I want you in my life. I want to face whatever comes next, together." A warm smile spread across Emily's face. "I want that too, Luke," she said. "I've waited a long time to say that, and I've hoped that you'd feel the same way." For the first time in years, Luke felt completely open to the idea of love. He had always been cautious, slow to trust, and careful with his heart. But with Emily, those walls seemed unnecessary. He realized that she was not just a reminder of the past, but a part of his present and future. Their bond, formed in a moment of danger and survival 20 years ago, had grown into something far deeper than either of them could have anticipated. They rode back toward the ranch together, the golden light of sunset casting a warm glow over their path. Luke felt a sense of contentment he had never known, a peaceful joy that came not from solitude or routine, but from sharing life with someone who truly understood him, someone who had been part of his story from the very beginning. Over the next few weeks, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Luke and Emily worked side by side, tending to the cattle, mending fences, and planting a small vegetable garden near the farmhouse. They shared meals together, laughed over small mistakes, and spent quiet evenings on the porch watching the stars appear one by one. The connection between them grew stronger with each passing day, grounded in trust, respect, and the shared memory of a life-changing moment. One evening, as they watched the sun set behind the distant hills, Luke spoke softly. "Emily, I've been thinking we both carried the memory of that day for so long. And now that we're here, together, I want to make sure we don't lose sight of what it means. I want us to build something that lasts, something real." Emily nodded, her eyes shining. "I feel the same way, Luke. We can't change the past, but we can choose the future. And I want to choose it with you." It was a simple declaration, but it carried the weight of decades. Two lives, shaped by a single moment, had come together to create a new path, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of shared experiences. As the months passed, Luke and Emily continued to grow closer. They celebrated the small victories on the ranch, supported each other through challenges, and took joy in the quiet, everyday moments that made life meaningful. The townspeople watched with curiosity and admiration, noting how Emily had become a part of the community and how Luke seemed more alive, more open, and more fulfilled than ever before. One day, as spring returned and the fields were once again lush and green, Luke led Emily to the edge of the river, the same river that had defined so much of their past. He stopped, turning to her with a seriousness that made her heart beat faster. "Emily," he said, taking her hands in his, "you came back to me after 20 years, and you reminded me of a moment I had almost forgotten. But more than that, you reminded me of what it means to care, to trust, and to open my heart. I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. Will you stay with me?"
Will you be my partner in every sense of the word? Emily's eyes filled with tears and she nodded, a radiant smile spreading across her face.
"Yes, Luke," she said softly. "I've waited my whole life to hear you say that. And I want nothing more than to be with you." Luke pulled her into a gentle embrace, the river flowing quietly beside them, as if bearing witness to the moment. It was a culmination of years of fear, courage, and hope, a reminder that life sometimes moves in mysterious ways, bringing the right people together at the right time. From that day forward, Luke and Emily were inseparable. Their lives intertwined not just through memory and destiny, but through the daily acts of love, care, and partnership. They celebrated the anniversaries of the flood, not as a moment of fear, but as a reminder of the strength and courage that had brought them together. The ranch flourished under their shared care. Luke's simple, steady routines were now filled with laughter, companionship, and the quiet joy of working alongside someone he loved deeply. Emily brought new ideas, energy, and life to the place, and Luke found that he was happier, more fulfilled, and more at peace than he had ever been. They often returned to the river, the place where their story had begun, to reflect, to talk, and sometimes simply to sit in silence. Each visit was a reminder that life's challenges could lead to extraordinary connections, and that courage, kindness, and persistence could shape destinies in ways we never fully understand. In the town of Cedar Creek, Luke and Emily became a symbol of hope and inspiration. Their story reminded everyone that even the most ordinary lives could hold extraordinary moments, that a single act of bravery could echo across decades, and that love could return, even after many years, to find the hearts it was meant to touch. Luke often thought about the little girl he had saved, the memory that had lain hidden for so long, and the woman who had returned to change his life. He realized that the flood, the fear, and the rescue had not been the end. They had been the beginning of a story that would last a lifetime, and now he was ready to live that story fully, with Emily by his side, sharing every sunrise, every challenge, and every joy that life on the ranch could offer. As the years passed, their bond only grew stronger. They faced hardships together, celebrated successes together, and built a life that reflected the courage, trust, and love that had first connected them. And every so often, when they stood by the river watching the water flow steadily past, they would smile at each other, knowing that the river had carried them to each other, and that destiny, however long it waited, had finally brought them home. Luke Henderson and Emily had discovered that life's greatest gifts often arrive quietly, sometimes decades after a single life-changing moment. And together they embraced every new day, every new challenge, and every new joy, knowing that their story, shaped by courage, love, and the passage of time, was only beginning.